and I ended up with a mass media post-graduation in mass comm. When I was growing up, I never analyzed what went through. So when Tanzila speaks, or other women with disabilities or persons with disabilities tell me, won't be referred as the person with, that woman who carries a white cane. I sort of embraced that identity in a very positive way. When people didn't remember me, I was like, hey, they can't forget me. I'm the woman with the white cane. So, how the queer politics has turned something queer, which was an abuse, into a very positive word. I changed the whole identity politics into a very positive politics, saying, oh, you don't remember me? I walked into your restaurant the other day. I'm the woman with the white cane. That happened with me. Fortunately, I am a little senseless and a little brainless when it comes to courage. So I never sort of, and I'm fortunate to be in a city which is very, very safe in our entire country. That is why it never struck me that a disability would impair me, impair my movements, impair my thoughts. Because I think I decided in my head that I am free, I am not restricted, and this is just a condition, like everything else is a part of me. Like my skin color is a part of me, like my weight is a part of me, like my height is a part of me, the disability is a part of me. For having said this, I do not want to say that I did not grow up in a non-disabled society. I did. I carried a lot of ideas that a non-disabled society does. And these ideas waned off when I joined this organization, a nonprofit organization working for women's rights called Point of View, which was the point where I got involved in activism, in working for gender and disability and issues arising out of their intersection. That is when I realized that someone who was so independent and so free in my mind and in my actions still carried a lot of stigma, a lot of prejudices, a lot of ideas about disability in my head. So I co-authored a website on sexual rights of women with disabilities, which is called sexualityandisability.org. I started volunteering with a lot of organizations, local organizations that worked for disabled persons, and specifically persons with visual impairment. And the following, what I'm going to say, is all my learning and my observation and my research that I've come across in the last couple of years. So I use the words called stigma, I use the word called social prejudice. What is it exactly? When we talk about gender and disability, I have often noticed that people say, oh, one, that they're disabled, second, that she's a woman. That is such a double disadvantage. But when we talk about double disadvantage, it is sort of that you're trying to add up two things, 1 and 1, 2, but it doesn't end up being that. It ends up being far more layered. It ends up multiplying. So this condition of gender and disability at the intersection, I would say, has a multiplicity of effects. It doesn't have an additionality. It has a multiplicity of effects. It is not as simple as, okay, women issues plus disabled issues. And this multiplicity has been ignored or has slipped between the cracks. So what do I mean when I say it has slipped between the cracks? In India particularly, a women's rights movement took a very strong hold from the 1980s. We passed the Vishakha guidelines for sexual harassment. We passed a lot of things. But where were the women with disabilities? Okay. The disability rights movement took a very strong hold in the 2000s, early 2000s, in this century. But where were the women with disabilities? So the women's rights movement forgot about the disability angle of it. The disability rights movements forgot the gender angle of it. And in the process, women with disabilities slipped between the cracks. Right. So having said that, why this could have also happened was it is a circle. Women with disabilities were not out there in the society. And that is why they were forgotten. But why were they not out there in the society? Because the society was not a very comfortable place for them to be. Touching about the women's scenario in India, we issues that women face. We know about male-dominated spaces. We know about the patriarchy that exists. In such a scenario, women with disabilities could not find their foothold, with people with disabilities still fighting for infrastructural access. It was another level altogether for WWD, or disabled women, to step out. And that invisibility instead led to this ignorance, led to the slipping between the cracks. Okay. So what are the overarching issues according to me? The overarching issues today in India, or I don't want to really generalize it, but in all developing countries, the overarching issue is that we have very specific gender defined roles. And unfortunately, women with disabilities do not fit in these gender defined roles. Now, people would say, yeah, but you don't fit into the roles. The problem is not about fitting into the roles. The problem is about the gender defined roles themselves, which women across the globe are fighting against. So when you say that, oh, what do you think the role of a woman is? To provide caregiving to the family. Then there is a next level of assumption that you can't see. How would you be a caregiver? Like Tanzila mentioned, that you're always at the receiving end. You're assumed to be a case in point which requires attention, who requires care, who requires medical assistance, who's reduced to someone who's at the receiving end of charity. In such a scenario, obviously women with disabilities were considered out of this gender role of being the caregivers or the protectors or the bonders of the family. And I will expand on this in the later sections. But the second most difficult, also challenging, or equally difficult and challenging, was that women with disabilities never fit into the cultural imagery. And what do I mean by cultural imagery? People say, oh, religion is the problem. A lot of people, attribute the problem that disabled women face to religious fundamentalism, to history. But what's been happening is that we all have a cultural imagery. We expect that women, as much as they're made out to be sexualized objects in the media, in advertising, in all of that, in the spaces, we've always seen that women are supposed to be a particular shape, particular size, particular look. And that is the kind of cultural imagery I'm talking about. That a woman is supposed to be this whole, this giving, this motherly look sort of a person. And what happens when you are marring that image and you're sitting on a wheelchair? Or what happens when you're marring that flawless catwalk that you're supposed to have and walking with crutches, or carrying a white cane and finding your way? So we, as disabled women, are really challenging the deep-rooted cultural imagery. And that's very, very unsettling. And those are the two overarching issues, according to me, which set people not really against us, but which make us this other group. This othering of disabled women happened because of that. Okay, so we spoke about the body and the aesthetic politics, and we can keep talking about it as much as we want, because there have been world famous authors, they've been everyone, there's pop culture that is perpetuating it, and we can talk about aesthetics as much as we want, but we'll just move on. Again, now politics, and that's very important for all of us because it's also about women with disabilities themselves. We have been given an identity, like the woman with the cane and the woman on the wheelchair. It's up to us what we do with that identity. It's up to us how we battle it, how we work along with it or against it. It's a very, sorry, is it time? No, okay. So it's a very, it's a very binary situation that we are we and they are us. What do I mean by this is, one, that there's a very there's a very distinct thing about disabled and non-disabled. And I hope everyone's marking my words here, because I'm not saying disabled and normal, because there's nobody who's normal. Who defines what's normal? Again, I would refer to Tanzila. She mentioned everybody has their own issues. Who is normal? So here we say that there are two categories called disabled and non-disabled. Okay. Now, what happens with the disabled and non-disabled? Once you divide it this way, you know that there is, if I'm the non-disabled, I am me, and those disabled people, always remain them. Or vice versa. I am disabled, and those are the non-disabled person, this different category. All of us forget a very important thing, which activists around the world are talking about, and I've come across in my work a lot, is that everybody here has a temporarily abled body. Tomorrow, if I was non-disabled, tomorrow I met with an accident, had a spine injury, I'm gone. If not a permanent spine injury, when I have a slip disc, what happens is I experience for those 1, 2, 3 months what a spinal cord injury person goes through. So the thing that we forget is we have a very temporarily able body. And as disabled people, what we forget is, it's a part of us. It's just a part of us. It's not our entire identity. It's just a part of us. And this identity politics is a major issue that we need to fight in the society everywhere around. I would also touch a lot upon what we internalize as persons with disabilities. And I do not blame anybody. I do not blame myself. I do not blame others who've done that, because we live in a space where everybody has a prejudice. And these prejudices slowly seep into us. So when I come to the following sections, I talk about some very funny internalizing segments that, a very basic internalized fact is that, people with disability think that if someone marries them, they're God, because they've accepted them with everything, with all their disabilities, with all their shortcomings, limitations, etc. I would have thought this as a teenager. I wouldn't deny it. I would have thought this as a teenager, but I'll tell you what changed that for me. Before that, I would like to touch upon a few numbers, and now Ayushi is telling me it's last 2 minutes for me to wrap up. So I'll quickly tell you, in India, out of all the women, about 2 point something% of women are disabled, out of all the disabled women, only 1% of women with disabilities get an education, right? And I won't get into the whole integrated, non-integrated education system. I can only give you a blanket statement saying, I have an education from abroad. I have been to the London School of Economics. What I've seen in the developed countries that you have special disability office support needs. That's missing in India, and I think that's missing in most of South Asia as well. Since I've been a sexual rights activist for a very long time, I would like to touch on two things and take up the last bit in the section about South Asia. I want to talk about sexual rights, which means body, which I touched briefly upon in terms of aesthetics and body image. Talking about sexuality, which means also about sexual orientation. Talking about relationship, parenting. I'll give you a small anecdote. All of us know in our heads what a non-disabled society or even the disabled society perceives about women with disabilities as caregivers, as wives, as girlfriends, as mothers, and all of that. Obviously, they will not be able to cook. And this is all an assumption. Obviously, they can't take care of children. Obviously, they can't be this ideal good wife and good daughter-in-law. I don't know who wants to be, but obviously they can't be all of that. Obviously they can't be the good girlfriend who will take care of the boyfriend when he's ill. I had internalized a few of these things when I was growing up as a teenager and when I just been diagnosed with the disorder. When I started working on the website and I interviewed a lot of women with disabilities across age groups, across socioeconomic stratas, across disabilities, I can give you a simple example. And I started noticing more around me. I came across this neighbor who had a 2-year-old daughter, and her had a minor accident, no major, whatever. She dashed her head against something really sharp, and she was bleeding profusely. This neighbor of mine, who is a non-disabled woman, with 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 legs, everything in functioning order, perfect, perfect bahu, perfect everything. And she had a full-scale panic attack. She could do nothing but weep. take her daughter in her arms and weep. It was everyone around her who went, who catered, who administered the first aid, who called the doctors, who pacified her daughter, took care of the entire situation. And I, as an outsider, just viewed this very rationally and thought, so this was a non-disabled woman. And she was given empathy because her daughter was hurt. Just imagine for a minute that this was a disabled woman. What would have been the reaction? She's disabled, right? How would she administer first aid to her daughter? We always told you there's this emergency and she will never be able to take care. And this incident changed everything inside me. The residual 10% of internalizing, thinking of me differently, everything else changed. And that helped me. The change within me, the shift within me, the 100%, when I reached that 100% shift within me, that is when I realized that I can now go out in the world and confidently and honestly, with all my heart, tell people that this is not so. Over to you, Ayushi.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nidhi. That was a lot of great information, and thank you for sharing your very personal experiences with us. I think I'll get Tanzila on board now. Tanzila, can you hear me? Tanzila?
We can't hear her.
Hello? Tanzila, are you there?
Yes, I can. Yes, I'm here. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, Tanzila, so we spoke about invisibility, we spoke about cultural imagery. So just wanted to get some perspective from you about what is it that your experiences have told you, specifically maybe from your country, if you could talk about it for that space.
Thank you, Ayushi, and thank you, Nidhi. You've touched upon so many things that it has actually got me thinking that what have I been doing? I need to start working. Okay. Well, Nidhi, a couple of pointers I've made when you were speaking. And to begin with, if I talk about Pakistan, one thing that really unites this region, South Asia, is our problems. And that is how we can really empower this whole region and not just one country. So pretty much what is happening in India, it's a replica of what is actually happening in Pakistan also, that women with disabilities are completely sidelined in anything. They're not given any opportunity, employment opportunity or education opportunity until unless they come from a stable family and the family is generally educated. And now very recently, for the past 2 or 3 years, we have started a National Forum for Women with Disabilities to just give a trigger start of such activities for such women. Now, I was lucky to come from a stable landlord family, so they were fine in giving me inclusive education. And even if there are any opportunities for women with disabilities, you really cannot count on them for any such development, because when it comes to disability is a very political issue in the development world. Why? Because you can never define disability, and just like Nidhi said, you can never define normal. So when it comes to giving opportunities to someone, you will judge me from head to toe in what way I'm disabled. And people have severe disabilities, then people have minor disabilities. So you can never define someone disabled and you can never define someone normal. So even when the government comes forward to make some policies, this problem is always left untouched because it's such a complicated process. The government decides to keep itself out from it. And even when we such activists, for example, I have a physical disability, Nidhi is visually impaired. So our disabilities are totally different. She requires different facilities. I require totally different facilities. So I hope you're getting my point that it actually becomes a very complex process, and that is why we need to attack it all together. We all need to sit down and discuss it and make it inclusive in our society, so it doesn't appear as a jumbled up ball. It should be as normal as everywhere. Mostly we see that in West. Now, Nidhi mentioned religion. Now, even here in South Asia, South Asian countries are very culture oriented, very religion oriented, family oriented. Even here in Pakistan, mostly disability is actually seen as a punishment. In some families, in families who aren't that educated, they are a little not familiar with new ideas, they look at disability as a punishment either on the family or on the person. God forbid if the person becomes disabled after a few years of his life, they always say, okay, this person has done something and now God has punished this person. And in case if a child is born disabled, then that child is looked upon as a punishment for the whole family. And then more or less sometimes even the whole family is looked down upon, that what the hell have this family been doing to get punished by God in this life. This is a very wrong concept, and it's it's something we need to address immediately, this mindset, because if the family is not accepted in a society overall, then it's very hard for them to go forward and get a good education, get a good employment. And I haven't touched the topic of marriage yet. Even when it comes to marriage, men with disabilities are more likely to get married to women who are non-disabled than women, because women are seen as mostly the keeper of the household. They are expected to work in the house, they're expected to take care of the children, and women with disabilities are always seen as if they won't be able to pull this job off very well. Though there are cases in this world, there are women who have been excellent mothers. I know some people personally in my life who are belly below paralyzed, but they've been excellent mothers, they've adopted children. And I might even share a link of the same person here for you to review. Her name is Muniba Khurram, and you may Google about her. So, change is happening. The society needs to open their minds to accept them. Women with disabilities can be as good as wives as any other woman. Or even, probably they can be very bossy as well. But at the same time, even if this marriage does take place, then the man or the person who is non-disabled, that person becomes a god. And that person always tends to give out a message that I did something big in my life. Although there's nothing like that, the girl or the boy with the disability might be making an equal compromise in that marriage. So by the end of the day, it all comes down to how you look upon it, and what do you think? What message should you be giving as a young leader, or as a young activist? And another thing, Nidhi was just talking, and I was thinking about something, that usually beauty is seen as, it's a celebrated aspect of a person. If a person is pretty in any way, dark or beautiful person. But in case of disability, beauty is seen as a disadvantage, because people come and they compliment you and they go like, wow, you're so pretty, oh, you're disabled and you're so pretty, as if trying to give you a message that one disabled face just got wasted because of a disability. And it has happened with me so many times. I would be walking down the road, or I would be in a mall, and people would come, and aunties especially would come and say that, oh, you're so pretty, Bete, you're so pretty. Oh, you're disabled, no problem, God will do good for you, God will do better for you. And I'm like, what the hell? I mean, if you like me so much, why aren't you taking me home? So it really, I just don't get what people really want to tell me. So this actually goes back to your mindset, that beauty is beauty, disregarding any other aspect. So one thing that, and then last but not least, I would also like to mention a little global perspective about disability, and you'll be surprised to know about this. I was part of Beijing Plus 20 in Bangkok. This conference is the largest conference of women in the whole world, and it first took place in 1984 in Beijing, and a bill was passed about women's rights. And can you believe it's a global level conference and there wasn't a single mention of women with disabilities in this conference? So 20 years later on, the forum, the national forum that we have formed, we went to Bangkok to actually talk about women with disabilities, and even we're talking to women activists. And if we mention that please speak about women with disabilities, we need to have that in the cross-cutting of the whole document. They were totally alienated. They were like, what? No, reproduction is a bigger issue. No, domestic violence is a bigger issue. They were least bothered about women with disabilities, and I'm speaking from a personal experience, not theoretically. I've actually spoken to activists of the world. Yeah. Ayushi?
A little bit, I think we could not hear you for, yeah, we could not hear you for a few seconds. So if you could just
Okay.
recap what you were saying.
Am I audible
You
now?
were, I'll tell you till where we heard. We said when you go to women activists, who does
Yes.
this? Yeah, we left you there.
So because living in South Asian country, at times we tend to believe that the West is best. Everything that is happening in the West is amazing. It's totally accessible. People are so friendly. But I was absolutely shocked. I'm talking to women leaders from all over the world, and they're least bothered about such an important part of the women community and the most vulnerable part. In every way, women with disabilities are more vulnerable to any problem, may it be reproductive or domestic violence or lack of opportunities, and they had completely ignored that. So we were there and we spoke to so many people. We were into networking, we spoke on forums, and in every tiny event, we made sure there was a woman with disability to represent. And even to this date, what we tend to push these women into different events, into forums, that you have to be present, you have to show that you exist. And that's what we're doing. So, by the end of the day, South Asia has a huge chance of becoming a leader in terms of disability empowerment, because the West, trust me, it's standing nowhere. They're good with nuclear and wars and everything, but no disability activism, trust me. So, and yes, I think I've pretty much covered all my points. Oh, back to Ayushi.
If Pakistan's ratified the UNCRPD? Tanzila, I just
Yes,
want to know if
yes,
Pakistan ratified that.
yes.
Yeah,
Can you give us some
yeah.
Tanzila, you think? Oh, okay.
No, no.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'm just saying, Nidhi, if you could give us some of your perspectives on Asia as a could look at gender and disability, or what is it that we should be doing?
Correct. So we've spoken a lot, and Tanzila has spoken about, reiterated about visibility and how it's important to include ourselves. We need to also take that step. About the West, very briefly, I have spoken to a lot of disability rights activists as well, and the personal issues, what we're talking about, the actual issues still remain the same. There's a lot of infrastructure, there's access, there's all of that. But when it comes to personal spaces, when it comes to domestic spaces, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to equality in the head, it is still a big issue. I will just talk about a couple of points which we have missed. I mean, like Tanzala again said, that in South Asia, and when I was researching about other countries as well, there are very similar issues. Some issues, some of us have moved a little ahead than the others, but issues are cross-cutting and they're very similar. There are 2-3 issues that we haven't talked about, and I'd like to talk about them, in with regards to South Asia, India, everything. One very important thing is about, this is about India, and I would like to highlight before I move to the bit about violence, which none of us have really touched in detail. There is this abortion, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act in India, which does not allow you to do a sex-selective abortion, which means women's rights groups fought for this and brought it as illegal if you do a sex testing and sex-selective abortion. Abortion is not allowed after a particular safe period for a woman, except if the fetus is disabled. The law itself speaks a lot about where do you consider people with disabilities. We don't have a right to exist. The society doesn't want people with disabilities. The fact that you're allowing a woman to abort a fetus in an unsafe period because it has a disability says a lot of it. When we meet with a lot of women's rights activists and say, disability selective abortion is as bad as a sex selective abortion, they would say, no, you don't know anything. You belong to a very well-to-do family. I'm like, what does that even mean? They're like, oh, there are no social supports in place for people with disabilities. Why should they be brought in the world? And I have a question that our social cultural background in South Asia has been that women have been disadvantaged, and that's why people wanted more of men in their as their sons and to carry on their legacy. Uh, then if there is a social obstacle, why do we make sex selective abortion illegal? But that's the level of not understanding, non-understanding that exists between women's rights groups and women with disabilities. So all we can do is come out, fight against it, talk more about it, include ourselves, and be there. To wrap up, I just want to talk about a bit about violence, which is faced globally a lot in South Asia, because as a part of the developing countries, 80% of people with disabilities live in developing countries itself. So, and in South Asia, we can talk about violence. There's been a recent Human Rights Watch report specifically about India, but the violence scenario is similar in South Asia. When we talk about violence, people think, oh, we're talking about rape, we're talking about sexual assault, we're talking about sexual harassment, and maximum domestic violence. When it is with a disability, again, the word that I had used, it is multiplied. It has a multiplier effect. It is very deep, it's very complicated and intricate. Because when we're talking about violence, I mean, negligence is violence. When families lock up their daughters in the room because they cannot face having a daughter with a disability and go away for family celebrations, that is another level of violence. When someone who's quadriplegic is not assisted deliberately, not given medicines deliberately because of their disability, that is violence. When the number of women with disabilities facing violence is twice as much as the disabled women. The children with disabilities who face abuse at home by parents and by others is about 80 to 90%, and that speaks a lot. But again in South Asia, children with disabilities are sent off to either special schools. If they are part of integrated system, it's the responsibility of the parent. There are organizations working for child sex abuse, but how many of them are adapted or skilled enough to handle children with disabilities, or are actively training children with disabilities? Domestic violence is such a common occurrence, and domestic violence specifically by people on whom the woman with disability is dependent. So either the caregiver, the parent, the aunt, the uncle, the jija, the masi. There are myriad levels of domestic violence happening. Just a second, sorry. Okay. This is also, according to me, because of a couple of factors that we touched upon. Education. Where is the possibility for women? First, that women getting educated. Okay, the scenario is changing in the cities. Okay, but what will women with disabilities do being educated? That mindset needs to change. Then there is about work. I'll tell you my little incident here. I started working in the nonprofit sector. So I have a couple of, I've done 2 masters before my London School of Economics degree. I am a trained journalist and I worked in the media for a long time. And then I decided to dedicate my skills to working within the development space or the nonprofit space. And whenever I go to parties and I meet someone, other than saying, oh, beta, you're pretty and you're disabled, I also hear that a lot. But other than that fact, they'll ask me, so what do you do, my child? And I'm like, oh, auntie, I work for this women's rights group. Matlab kya? What does that mean? Auntie, there's this NGO. I work for disabled women. Then they'll make this really sorry face and their voice dips a couple of notches and they'll say, we are so glad you're keeping yourself busy somehow. And I just look to them and I smile because I'm thinking all the time in my head that I'm going to international fora, I'm making all these presentations, I'm going and talking about, doing advocacy for change. That's not because I want to just keep myself busy. But that's the whole idea about women with disabilities, that they either cannot work. If they work, it is just to occupy themselves for some sort of time pass. And that hampers their independent living. When you're not financially independent, when you're not independent unto yourself, when the state does not provide services to make things accessible for you, who are you dependent on? On the family, on the immediate support group. And that renders a lot of power in their hands. And I'm not trying to say that all families are harmful. I'll be the last person to say that, because I'm here today because of my supportive family. But that is the reason for most of the domestic violence. That first, though, you can't get married. If you get married, someone did meherbani, obliged you and got married to you, then though the husband has the right to beat you, to sexually assault you, to bring his friends, to do whatever you want, because you have no escape. You don't have a medical system that's accessible. You don't have a health, there's no home for disabled women which will be safe enough for you. There's not the world which will support. So that's the kind of level of issues that we're facing. There are two groups which we've not touched upon, and I don't think we have the time, but I would definitely like to mention them. Is the LGBTQ group, so lesbian women who are disabled. I haven't met a lot of them. Trans women who are disabled, I haven't met a lot of them, because for them coming out is such an issue, and then coming out with a disability, we can only imagine what it must be. The other side that I want to tell you is about women with disabilities getting into commercial sex work. There have been cases here in Maharashtra, where Maharashtra is the state of India that I belong to, that women with disabilities were thought futile for every other thing but for sex work, and their families threw them in sex work. And this is not a judgment on sex work and its legitimacy. It's just a judgment on what is the merit, what are the points of usefulness and uselessness that a society renders to you. Lastly, I just want to say that disability is a cross-cutting thing. Why do women with disabilities, and this is a question for everyone to think for them in their head, we need to wrap up, right? So for us to think in our head, that why today all of us, our countries, in spite of most of us in South Asia having ratified the UN CRPD, having ratified CEDAW, that is, elimination of discrimination against women, Convention on Elimination. Why, after having ratified the Convention on Protection of Child, why do we still have to separately push for women with disabilities within these groups? Why can't we be a natural part of it? That's our fight. That's our fight, to be a natural part of the society, to have a society which doesn't view the disability as a limitation, but the fact that the society, the social model by Mike Oliver, which says that the society cannot provide for you, and that is the limitation. It is not accessible. The roads are not accessible, and that's a limitation. When we shift from a medical and a charity model to this kind of thinking, I think the world will be a better place for all of us, and particularly for women with disabilities. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nidhi. Guys, anyone has questions to ask for both Tanzila and Nidhi? Please let me know right now. Is there anyone? If you do, I'll unmute you right away. You just tell me on chat if you have a question. Oh, all right. So, I guess one last thing, Tanzila, Nidhi, both of you could talk about this. What is it that you think we can do collectively as this region, including both disabled and non-disabled people? What can we do collectively to sort of work on the situation that we are in and make it better?
Okay. Tanzila, you'll go first.
Okay, wait. Somebody also has another question. So maybe you could answer this one, and then Vivek will get your question.
Tanzila.
Me first? Okay.
Yes.
I personally never focus on groups. As a trainer, I focus on individual people, and I'm a believer of individuality and how one unit, if defaulted, the whole system may collapse. So what I really feel is that young people today must grow up with the mindset of inclusion and the acceptance of diversity of any kind. So, as a disabled person, I understand, and I'm sure we all understand the problems of racism, of discrimination, because all these things somehow are connected. So not just for disability or any thing, but I really want young people to accept people the way they are, be a support system for them, and don't volunteer for them, volunteer with them. Bring them on the workforce. Don't make them the target participant for any of your project. And work with them And young people today, even if a group of young people doing any project, being just one single disabled person in their group, you have done your part in empowering that person, because working changed my life. Being part of the working side changed my life rather than being worked for. So it's a very simple formula that we all can apply, and it will make a big difference. Thank you. Nidhi.
Thanks, Tanzila. So, if we want to actively, uh, like we always say, we want to make spaces inclusive. Simple things that we can do is, in our conferences, have, segments which clearly say that, we will take care of any access needs. Even if you do not have a single, so I would actually recommend that you actively involve people with disabilities, because that's the starting point of any kind of inclusion. When there are groups that are invisible and you want to sort of include them in spaces, we have to actively work to bring them to the visibility front. So one is that, but even if you don't actively do this, the fact that you make everything, you give always options of, simple things that in a conference, if you have a form which asks, do you have a disability? Do you need any do you have any access needs? Says a lot to a non-disabled participant, said that, oh yeah, a person with a disability has the right to be here. And the next time they attend something else, they will notice it. So you're already making a shift in their head. And short of making people interact with each other, there's no other way to make a society inclusive, because beyond the head we need to move into reality, saying this is how you interact and these are not alien creatures.